I now call to order the Station Area Task Force Special Meeting of July 25th, 2024. I will now call the roll. Member Diaz,
Present.
Member Collins, Member Evans,
Present.
Member Ganesh,
Present.
Member Hashimoto,
Present.
Member Huff,
Present.
Member Leung,
Present.
Member Mayer,
Here.
Member Ondrasek,
Here.
Member Plain,
Here.
and Member Stockwell.
Present.
I will now read the SATF meeting procedures into the record. As we currently don't have a chair, I will be reading it into the record, but typically meetings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the SATF directs all activity during the meeting. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. Special procedures and time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Copies of the current agenda and any staff reports for each item on the agenda are available online on the Station Area Specific Plan website, as well as on the City Clerk's website. We'll move on to the consent calendar, and there are currently no items on the consent calendar, so we'll be moving on to general business. Oh,
They probably put it at the end.
it's
Yeah.
moved. So the first item on the general business is the training on the Brown Act given to us by Chief Assistant City Attorney.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Yeah, great. So you'll see on your agenda that this presentation was actually agendized to be a training on both the Brown Act and the Political Reform Act. We are only going to cover the Brown Act tonight. The Political Reform Act is a state law that is applicable largely to candidates, elected officials, folks who are participating in making financial decisions for public agency that file financial disclosure forms, things of that nature. It's almost entirely inapplicable to this body. So we're going to give you that time back tonight and not go over that body of law. But the Brown Act is extremely important to the conduct of business for this body. So we will be going over that tonight. Next slide, please. Let's start with the background of the Brown Act. It's a state law. It was passed by the legislature in 1953. It was incorporated into the state constitution in 2004. And it has three primary purposes: to provide openness and transparency to the public, to ensure that the public has meaningful access to its agencies, and to provide the public with means to provide their input to their bodies. There's a number of state laws that apply to charter cities, such as the city of Santa Clara, that are aimed at ensuring openness and transparency. The Brown Act is just one of these laws. For example, like we mentioned, the Political Reform Act, it contains requirements for financial disclosures to promote transparency in financial decision-making. Another example is, I'm sure you've heard of it, the Public Records Act, which requires public agencies to make public many categories of documents or other records that concern the public's business, with limited exceptions. Of course, there's always limited exceptions. What these laws evidence is a strong desire by the public and by the legislature to ensure full and complete access to the public. Next slide, please. The core tenet of the Brown Act is as follows. All meetings of the legislative body of a local agency shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body of a local agency, except as otherwise provided in this chapter. This is the central function of the Brown Act. Let's go through the major elements of this core tenet. First, the city of Santa Clara is the local agency for the purpose of the Brown Act. Even though it's a charter city, the Brown Act still applies. They're specifically included in the act. Second, the task force is the legislative body subject to the Brown Act. Again, the definition of legislative body under the Act is very broad, and it specifically includes advisory bodies such as this task force that are created through formal action of the City Council. Next slide, please. The third element of the core tenet of the Brown Act is what constitutes a meeting. This is often the most problematic piece of this law. Is every occasion that a quorum of you is present in any particular location at the same time considered a meeting under the Brown Act? And the answer is no, it's not. So there are certain elements, certain requirements in order for a formal meeting under the Brown Act to occur. A majority of the task force has to be present, so 6 of you. The members have to be in the same location at the same time, but that does include by virtual means, so teleconferencing is included. The purpose of the members being in the same location at the same time would be to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item. Now, that's pretty broad, right? So even if you're just hearing people talk about something, even if you're just discussing something but not making any motions, right? It's a very broad definition. And the last element, and this is the piece that is sort of most helpful to this body or anybody, the item being discussed or decided is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body, of this body, the task force. So all 4 of these have to be present in order for a technical meeting to occur under the Brown Act. Let's take an example. You all go to a council meeting because you're interested in an agenda item dealing with a change to the water rates. And you all speak as residents because you're interested in this topic. This would meet the first 3, but not the 4th element of the definition of a meeting under the Brown Act. So water rates are not a part of this task force's charter, right? They're not a part of providing input on the vision, land use, circulation, and urban design aspects of the station area specific plan. So it's not within the subject matter jurisdiction of your body. Therefore, it wouldn't be considered a meeting of the station area task force, even though a majority of you were present at that location at the same time. This also falls within a specific exception to the meeting definition. We'll discuss that on the next slide. There's one major pitfall to this 4-prong definition of a meeting, and that is what's called the serial meeting scenario. Although a serial meeting is technically not a meeting under this 4-part test, as we'll discuss, the Brown Act still makes serial meetings an illegal method of communication for a public body. We'll discuss serial meetings in more detail in just a couple minutes. Now we can get to the next slide. So before we get to serial meetings, let's run through the statutory exceptions to the definition of meetings under the Brown Act. So it specifically allows for a majority of the members of this body to be in the same place at the same time for certain enumerated reasons, such as attending a conference, attending a community meeting, attending an open and noticed meeting of another local agency legislative body, such as, for example, a city council meeting where they're talking about water rates that everybody is interested in. Okay? And also attending a social or ceremonial event. So let's say you go to a groundbreaking for a park in the area. That is a social or ceremonial event. And so even if a majority of you were there, that would not constitute a meeting under the Brown Act. The important thing to note here is when you do attend that groundbreaking or you do attend that council meeting to talk about water rates, that you do not discuss task force business when you're there. That would then trigger a meeting under the Brown Act, because then a majority of you are discussing task force business in a time when it's not agendized and open to the public. Okay, so communications for less than a majority. So this is kind of an interesting quirk of the Brown Act. In certain circumstances, it's fine to discuss task force business outside the confines of a noticed meeting, but it's a very tricky prospect. It has to be less than a majority of you, right? And it has to be less than a majority of you total over time. Okay, so we'll talk about serial meetings and the different ways serial meetings can happen and how easy it is to accidentally create a serial meeting. And so for those reasons, we tend to encourage people not to even bother having less than a majority type of communications relating to legislative body business. But that is the sort of key. And it's also important to note that the type of communications that's occurring for less than a body is also very important. So in today's day and age, there's a lot of use of social media to communicate. There are special rules relating to communication via social media that are actually more restrictive than regular Brown Act rules. And so for all of those types of reasons, we kind of encourage, although not illegal under the Brown Act, we do kind of encourage you to stay away from communications of less than a majority relating to task force business. Okay, next slide, please. Right, so I've used the term serial meeting a few times already. So what is a serial meeting? It's simply a series of communications. It can be communications of any kind, whether they're face-to-face or through electronic means. They can be directly between members of the task force, or they can be through intermediaries. And these discussions are to discuss or deliberate or decide any issue that's within your subject matter jurisdiction. There are two main types of serial meeting scenarios. The first is the daisy chain scenario. So that's member A talks to B, then B talks to C, then C talks to D. And through a chain, you get to 6 members of this body having discussed or deliberated on a matter that's within your jurisdiction. The second option, or the second type, is the hub and spoke scenario. In that case, you have member A, who then speaks to B, and then A speaks to C, and then A speaks to D, right? And through that, you end up with deliberation of more than a majority on a topic within your jurisdiction. It's very important to note that sometimes this happens inadvertently, right? If you are all within the same community or neighborhood and you chat and you don't realize that you're getting into things that are within your subject matter jurisdiction, you're just chatting about things that are happening in the neighborhood, it can just sort of inadvertently occur, okay? And so it's important to sort of keep these types of different scenarios in mind when you are discussing items that could theoretically be within the subject matter jurisdiction. The most common way that this comes up is in the email scenario. Staff is generally pretty good about, and not just the staff, but staff generally in the city is pretty good about ensuring that when they send emails to legislative bodies as a whole for scheduling purposes or otherwise, that they put you on BCC so that you're unable to reply all. But sometimes it's inadvertent, and it happens if you get put into the regular CC line. If you hit reply all, that becomes a communication subject to the Brown Act, right? The Brown Act violation. And that is really the most common error that we see statewide in this. So you should know, staff is allowed under the Brown Act to communicate with members individually or jointly regarding scheduling or providing copies of agenda packets or other materials. Members, like I said, shouldn't hit reply all, but if you do, one of the ways that we can address that is you can either recall the email quickly, or what we'll do is we'll add it to the upcoming agenda packet to make it public. Okay. Members are certainly allowed to send communication to staff members with questions, with comments, but those emails with questions or comments should not include other task force members. Okay. So also be aware that other members may be contacting staff with similar questions, right? If you get an agenda packet and 5 of you or 6 of you or 7 of you all have similar questions, it's important to make sure that those communications are individualized and not that sort of in an aggregate fashion to everybody on the task. So we want to avoid the hub and spoke scenario. So we don't ask and we don't share information obtained from other board members. So for example, in discussing a particular issue with staff, if you have questions, let's avoid questions such as, what have other members said about this issue. Or, well, member X told me that he opposes the item. Statements like that tend to inadvertently put a staff member as the hub in the hub and spoke scenario. Okay. Next slide, please. Right, teleconferencing. So remote meeting teleconferencing rules have been modified as a result of the pandemic. Now that the COVID state of emergency has been lifted, fully remote meetings are no longer allowed under state law. Therefore, we've transitioned, as you see, to a hybrid meeting system that provides both in-person and online access for the public. So what are the requirements for a member who wishes to remotely attend a meeting? A member may wish to participate remotely if he or she is on vacation or something of that nature. In such a circumstance, the Brown Act requires the following. All votes must be by roll call, which likely they will be here anyway because we don't have access to electronic voting for this body. Each teleconference location shall be identified in the notice and the agenda of the meeting. So if you're on vacation and you wish to attend a meeting of this body, you will have to provide the location from which you are attending, your vacation location, so that that can be listed on the agenda. Each teleconference location shall be accessible to the public. So for the time period that you are attending the meeting remotely via Zoom, you should probably do so from, let's say, the lobby of the hotel in which you're staying, so that it would be a publicly accessible place. At least a quorum of the members of the legislative body shall participate from locations within boundaries of the city. So for our purposes, at least 6 of you should, for every meeting, be here or at the library or wherever this meeting is being held. And the other 5 of you can participate remotely from whatever locations you're in. And the agenda has to provide an opportunity for members of the public to address the legislative body directly at each teleconference location. There are certain enumerated reasons, which we'll go through, where we don't need to include the location where you're staying on the agenda. And we don't have to figure out a way in which that location can be made open to the public. So when can you attend remotely without noticing and posting on the agenda? You have what's called just cause for participating remotely if you have a child care or caregiving need for a child, for a parent, for a grandparent, grandchild, sibling, spouse, or domestic partner. Or if you have a contagious illness such as COVID that prevents you from attending in person. If you have a need related to a physical or mental disability, or if you are traveling on official business, which is not going to be applicable to this body. And you could also avoid making your location public if you're experiencing what's called, quote unquote, emergency circumstances. That's defined as a physical, family medical emergency that prevents you from attending in person. So as you can imagine, we don't want to create a situation in which someone has a communicable disease and they're forced to make their home public to spread the disease in order to comply with the Brown Act, but they may certainly be well enough to be mentally present and participate in the meeting, right? So these rules are intended to sort of find a balance between those concerns. Next slide, please. All right, so let's now talk about social media. We mentioned briefly that social media actually has greater constraints than regular Brown Act requirements. So AB 922 went into effect in January of 2021. And it basically prohibits any kind of discussions on social media between members of a legislative body. You cannot respond in any way, including posting a comment or using the like button to a post by another member of the task force relating to something within the subject matter jurisdiction of it. So note that this really changes the definition of the majority rule, right, for meetings. So it's perfectly fine for 4 of you to meet in person and discuss something. But the second somebody hits the like button on Facebook, it becomes a violation of the Brown Act. It's very strange, I will say, very strange. But it's the law and we have to follow it. So if there's a comment thread that only involves two of the members of this body, that would be a violation of this new law. Sharing a post that was written by another member would also be a violation of this law. This applies to what's called internet-based social media platforms. It's defined to include services such as Facebook, Nextdoor, LinkedIn, Twitter, et cetera. Are there any questions about this particular?
Someone posted something, say, on social media to advertise, say there was going to be an outreach meeting. And another member liked that. Is that a violation?
That's not necessarily a violation.
Okay.
And the reason why is because the scheduling of that meeting is not within necessarily the subject matter jurisdiction of this body. Scheduling of the meeting happens by staff. So if you're just sharing that kind of material, I'm not too concerned about it becoming a Brown Act violation. There's no decision-making issue there for you.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, so how can we make meetings open and public? This is arguably the most important piece of all of this, right? The whole point of the Brown Act is to ensure that members of the public have an ability, a process that they can easily access to have a way to discuss with their decision-making bodies how the decisions are made, the things that affect their lives. So how do we make sure that that happens? So this is the fourth central tenet of the Brown Act, right? Another way to say open and public is transparent and accessible, right? So just think about those words. What are we doing? How are we making it transparent? How are we making it accessible? So we want the public to know what's going to be discussed. We want them to be able to hear the deliberations of the decision makers. We want them to be able to read the relevant documents, and we want them to be able to provide commentary to the decision makers on the issues so that the decision makers can take those comments into consideration. So how do we accomplish this? First, we provide notice via published agendas. Second, the public can provide their input through public comment periods, both generally and specifically as to each item on the agenda. And third, we ensure that the bodies don't engage in any non-agendized discussions. So what is public comment? Members of the public are allowed to provide comment on any issue within the body's subject matter jurisdiction. Comment period must be allowed on each agenda item prior to the decision being made. Okay, so prior to a motion being made, prior to a vote on a motion, the public has to be given an opportunity to speak on each and every agendized item. There is also what's called public presentations section of the agenda, right? You saw that. And that allows for members of the public to come up and give public comment to the body on items that may be within the jurisdiction of the body, but aren't on the agenda tonight, okay? It's important to stick to the agenda, right? We don't have any substantive discussion on items that are not agendized because this would provide the public with their right to have notice of the items to discuss. If a non-agendized item is raised by a member of the public during that public presentations period, you're allowed to briefly respond to the public's comment or refer the person or issue to city staff to follow up or for possible inclusion on a future agenda. That should really be the limit of the things that this body says if it's about a topic that's not on the agenda for that evening. Okay? Next slide, please. All right. So let's talk about open and closed sessions portions of the evening. Everything that this task force does is going to be on an open session agenda, okay? And it's going to be following all these rules that we've been discussing. The default position under the Brown Act is that everything is on an open session agenda. There's a very narrow list of reasons why a Brown Act body can convene to closed session. You may have seen the city council do this on different occasions. But for this body, there is very little chance, slim to none, that there would ever be a need for this body to convene to closed session. In the very, very small risk of the event that this body is required to convene to closed session, then strict confidentiality rules do apply. The entire body is the holder as a whole of the attorney-client privilege. So no one member can, without the affirmative consent of the entire body, make any of the information from closed session public. Okay? And violation of that confidentiality may subject the member to review by the civil grand jury. So penalties and enforcement. What are the consequences of violation of the Brown Act? Generally, a violation can be cured by re-agendizing the disputed item and curing whatever procedural defects there may have been. It's fairly simple and straightforward. An aggrieved person can also sue to overturn any action taken in violation of the Brown Act if it was not cured by the legislative body in a timely fashion. The person can recover his or her attorney's fees and costs, so it can theoretically be fairly expensive for the city. And if an action is taken by the body in violation of the act with the intent, it's important, with the intent to deprive the public of information, so sort of intentionally violating the Brown Act, then it can be prosecuted as a criminal offense. Next slide, please. All right, so how do we conduct meetings to ensure that these core tenets of the Brown Act are sort of lived, right? Not just in theory, but in life. So the city code does require that the city council meetings must be conducted pursuant to the Roberts Rules of Order. And we also make sure that boards and commissions follow these rules as well. The purpose of these rules is to promote orderly conduct, clarity, and to protect the rights of the minority by facilitating discussion. Next slide, please. The way that that business is conducted generally follows the following rules. So first, you have to establish a quorum is present, right? A quorum is basically a minimum number to make a decision, and that's a majority, in this case, 6. If a quorum is present, the meeting may continue, but all motions must be unanimous to pass, okay? So the number of votes required to take action is a majority. The number of votes required to conduct business is a majority. If you have just barely a majority, 6 votes, then it becomes a unanimous requirement. Does that make sense? And that's based on our charter provision 1003 that requires boards and commissions to have that voting requirement. All right, next slide, please. So each agenda item has a 7-step process, okay? In order to ensure that everybody gets an opportunity to speak and that the public is well informed and has an opportunity to provide their input as well. So it'll start with the chair reading the agenda item description. The chair then asks for staff report or presentation. The members have an opportunity to ask staff questions to clarify the presentation. The chair will then invite public comment on the item. The chair will then invite a motion and a second. The chair then asks the members to discuss the motion, and then a vote is taken on the motion. And that process is to be repeated for each and every agenda item that you have. Next slide, please. All right, so there's also general rules of process, again, to ensure orderly conduct. The chair will call on a speaker, okay? So we want to ensure that we don't have a muddled record. We want to ensure that it's clear in the record who spoke when. And so the chair calls on a speaker, and the speakers, including members, not just members of the public, should address their comments to the chair, okay? So we also have time limits within our processes that apply to public comments. There are different time limits for comments provided in different times. So whether it's a comment provided in the course of a specific agenda item versus a comment that's provided in the public presentation section of the agenda, there are different time limits that apply, but those are all enforceable time limits. Public comment on specific agenda items should be germane to that item, okay? So there are sometimes situations in which you have folks who come up to give public comment on specific agenda items, but really their comments have nothing to do with the item at all. You can certainly stop a person at that time and tell them to come back during the public presentation section of the agenda. Public comment on non-agenda items, like we just said, should be under public presentations, not under the item itself. And lastly, I'm sure you've all heard about Zoom bombings that occurred. This is a hybrid format. So there's the possibility for that. There's the sort of quote unquote hate speech bombings that have occurred up and down the state in public meetings. And there are specific rules and restrictions on what we can do because it is free speech. And the information and the procedures that we use for that will be discussed with the chair that you select, because it will end up being a job of the chair to ensure that those procedures are followed in an effective and legally compliant way. Okay. Right. Next slide. Now I'll open up generally for questions as to the Brown Act. If anybody has any on this exciting topic of the law. Yes.
So you mentioned that like if a majority were to attend a meeting, like a city council meeting, that could be potentially a meeting. What if the topic of the meeting is actually one that's under our purview? Like, for example, they're talking about a project development within the station area plan. Are we allowed to comment on that item or not
Yes,
under the city council?
So generally speaking, staff would let you know that a topic is coming to city council that falls within the purview of the task force. And if a majority of you state your interest in attending that meeting, we can, and we have in the past, essentially double noticed the item so that we don't have any kind of procedural issues with regard to the Brown Act. So we'll just notice it as both a city council meeting and also a special meeting of the task force. But that's why it's important to respond to emails from staff if they reach out and ask you if you plan to attend or anything like that. It's important to respond because it's these kinds of procedural things that we try to keep on top of. Put that plug in there. Yes.
Yeah, so let's say you and a couple other like task force members, I don't know, meet up because you want to discuss like architecture or you want to discuss urban planning or maybe take a tour of a proposed building site or something like that. And I know that wouldn't classify as a meeting, but the work you're doing is still tangentially related to the task force. So like, what's the procedure going through with that?
Yeah, so are you referring to work that you would do specific to the task force or work that you would do that is only theoretically or tangentially related to the work of the task
Yeah,
force?
only theoretically or tangentially related.
Okay. So that's sort of similar to a conference scenario, right? So let's say there is a project development in an entirely different part of town, or even in San Jose, that you're interested in seeing, and three of you decide you want to go and take a tour of that development. You're certainly entitled to do so. There's less than a majority of you. It's important that you not discuss task force business while you're on that tour, but just like you would if you were going to any other type of meeting that could have any kind of substantive link to your decision-making, but not directly on an agendized topic. So the project in San Jose is never going to be on your agenda, right? It's just the things that you learn, you will use for the purposes of your decision-making going forward.
Okay.
You can talk about task force stuff as long as there's not a majority.
Well, for the reasons we mentioned, we would discourage you from doing that.
Encouraged, but as long
Yes.
as you're not doing serial or any of the other things.
It wouldn't be illegal. Any more questions?
So I just had one. You gave examples of reasons that you could not be attending physically.
Mhm.
The one you didn't was if we were on vacation.
Right, so that was the example that I used was, let's say you're on vacation, you're at a hotel.
Okay, I
Right.
didn't hear vacation.
Yeah, so if you're just out of town, if you're at a hotel, then and you want to still participate as opposed to missing a meeting, then the location that you're vacationing at would have to be made public on the agenda.
I just heard you said official business, trip. I did not hear vacation. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Is there any public comment?
Is there anyone that would like to address the task force on this item from the public? I'm not seeing any hands.
And there's no action to be taken, so we can simply move on to the next item.
Thank you, Sue, for your presentation. Okay, so moving on to the second item for discussion is opportunities and constraints exploration, which will be led by the consultants WRT.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. Members of the task force, hello, good evening. It's been a couple months since we saw you, I think a little bit more. And in that meeting, we talked about existing conditions. So we presented a whole series of analyses of the study area, considering a number of different elements, land use, circulation, infrastructure, et cetera. We got comments from all of you on that material, sort of confirmed that our understanding was correct on the existing conditions. Then we reissued that as a summary report, which I think you've all received. That was really helpful. We've been very busy since then, sort of taking that information and thinking about, what is a constraint in all of that and what might represent an opportunity in any of the different issue areas. So an opportunity could be circulation related, an opportunity could be land use related. So we're really looking quite broadly at, what are the things that would inhibit creating a successful district that would be considered a constraint, and what are those things that represent an opportunity to create a successful district. So that's what we want to talk about tonight. It's starting to get interesting because the opportunities become sort of a preamble to conceptual thinking. And that's the next step, in fact. Not quite the next workshop with you all, because I think our next workshop with you is to sort of finalize the opportunities and constraints thinking. So we want to be careful. We want to make sure we've caught everything, that we've reflected your input. And then once we've done that in the next workshop, then the one after, we start getting into, the exploration of conceptual thinking. So we're really excited to see this process progressing. And I'm going to turn it over to Poonam and to Diksha. And we're just going to walk through our materials. We're going to try to do this very efficiently because we'd like to leave an hour, if possible, for discussion and to hear from all of you. So we know you're all quick studies. We're going to sort of clip through this quickly and just try to respect everybody's time and let everybody go at 8 o'clock. So let's give it a try.
I have a clarification. The summary report was not reissued. We received comments from VTA in the middle of this month, so we're still working through some of those and will be reissued.
We will reissue, yeah? Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify.
Okay, great, thank you.
I could see it coming. See the wheels turn. Okay, hello everyone. Lovely to see all of you. And let's dive in. It's been 2 months, so I'll just reset our stage a little. I don't know why that little piece is not moving out. I have moved it out of my screen share, but it's still there, so please ignore it. But yeah, our station area, let's talk through some of the regional local influences. Let's recenter ourselves in this process before we dive into opportunities and constraints. So it's a major influence zone it's positioned very well in the South Bay. It has major rail connectivity. It has an airport next to it. There's the Diridon sphere of influence. We had the VTA playbook already happen. One of the major regional influences that we started thinking about was the airport. And how does that fit into this context? We spoke a lot about the trains, etc., but the airport is also a feature. So there's a project in San Jose which is still studying whether they should have airport connectivity, so that we just roughly drew a route. It's very vague. Please don't look at it too carefully. You will not find that drawn anywhere else. But thinking of that for Santa Clara, shouldn't Santa Clara Airport station also be connecting to the airport? What can something like that look like? So we drew a potential loop, just thinking of this opportunity. We did want to point out that VTA does have a transit route, which does follow a lot of this. It goes from near the downtown to the station to the airport. So it does technically exist. Maybe it's about rebranding, putting it out there, and just publicizing it through this process, or maybe it's about looking at something alternative. That's one of the things we want to put out there for us to think about through this process. Some of our local influences, there's definitely our downtown, the university. We start moving towards the Benton, the Gateway Crossings, which are these catalyst projects, which bring a lot of like mid to high density to the station area, which is the kind of development that utilizes the capacity of a future transit station. We start seeing more office uses on the other side of Gateway Crossings. And then there's the light industrial segment and the Costco that also exist in our region. So thinking of all of those groups again.
Just a comment on the last one. This whole idea of this couplet of the Arts Paseo, which is the extension of Franklin, which begins in downtown, goes through the major public spaces of the downtown precise plan, and then makes its way through the university, and then potentially connects to the station and beyond. So that's maybe one component of a potential couplet. And then there's been a lot of talk of the sort of the Benton Brokaw as another part of that couplet. Both of these are interrupted now; they don't exist, but they certainly represent an opportunity. So I think that's something we want to look at more closely.
And reorienting ourselves to the BART station which is a major factor for this project to even exist, and the kind of energy that that's going to bring to the station area. So then let's center ourselves in the station area. Who are the people actually who use the station area right now? What kind of user groups do we have? We definitely have transit riders, which is a small bubble that is in the center, sort of connects a lot of these different bubbles together. There's the Santa Clara University, the students, faculty, staff that move through the station area. We have employees who come to the area in the light industrial, to Santa Clara University, to Costco, to the other employers that are in the area. We have residents from our Gateway Crossings, Benton, Old Quad neighborhood. And then we have some shoppers because there's a Costco, obviously, in the area. So that is a regional draw as well, which also leads to our regional visitors. There might be some airport travelers that are crossing through the area. So thinking of all these user groups as we start thinking of the opportunities, we've divided the opportunities into 3 areas of thinking. The first one that we wanted to look at is connectivity, existing connectivity. We have the underpass, which is our pedestrian connectivity across El Camino and Benton, which play a major factor in the area. Brokaw, which currently is a little ignored, but would want to become a different landscape and character altogether, since it's the street leading to the BART station. De La Cruz, which is elevated and currently goes across the tracks as a very auto-oriented character, And how does that touch into Coleman? And how do we want to re-envision that? And what kind of like street characteristics do we want?
And just to add a note to that, Dela Cruz and Coleman were designed as sort of high throughput arterials back in the day. And there was a reason for that. They were meant to be arterials that connect you to from point A to point B, which was in the distance. And this was sort of a throughput area, at the time, at that time, and to a certain degree now, it was sort of an industrial zone, not necessarily a destination for mixed use or pedestrians. Now, when you start to think of this as a mixed use district that wants to feel walkable, these sort of high throughput arterials are maybe not as relevant as they were then. So how do we start to reimagine these facilities so that they fit more into this, walkable district orientation?
Just reminding ourselves that there are transit routes that currently serve the area. All of the bus stops for VTA are south of the train station and are going to stay in that location. They don't intend to have transit connectivity at the northern end. And then thinking about bike connectivity overall, the proposed thinking of maybe connecting Benton and Brokaw with a bike corridor, or having bike lanes on Coleman in this new district. Some of the constraints that we wanted to talk through is definitely the railroad is obviously a major barrier, which disconnects the north and the south of the station area. Jim already touched upon Dela Cruz, but that's the one road connectivity across, and then we have one pedestrian connectivity across the station area in connecting the north and south. So those are a little limiting, and as we add more density, we might want to think of more connections. And then we have an underdeveloped street network on the north side. You can see there are big blocks. The industrial area doesn't really connect, the streets don't connect through, so it's really broken up. And as we want to reimagine this district, that's a constraint that we have currently. We talked about Coleman being a high-speed auto-oriented corridor. It's very wide. In some places, it's more than 90 feet. Is that the kind of space that we want to dedicate to cars in that area moving forward? Same with El Camino Real, which is also a major barrier for bike and pedestrian connectivity across the station, and getting very not transit oriented, not pedestrian oriented at this moment in its physical form. So let's look at the connectivity opportunities. We want to maybe enhance the connectivity with a finer grained street grid. So you can see our little blue arrows coming in and creating a more grid-like structure in the northern half of the industrial block. Also where we have the Costco area, we're not touching the footprint of the Costco, but there is a driveway there. So maybe rethinking how connectivity happens. One of the major things that we have here is the roundabout, which is Dela Cruz joining Coleman. So reimagining that entire intersection and turning that into a more pedestrian, slow traffic oriented, not slow traffic, but just not high speed throughput traffic. So thinking of a roundabout maybe, which also creates extra land space, which could be used for some other purposes like new parks, etc., in the district, which are severely lacking. And then using the station as a hub for mobility in general, and for last mile and first mile connectivity. So those are some of the opportunities, and we want to just flip through a few precedents to illustrate some of those ideas. This is Millennium Bridge in Denver. They have this lovely bridge that connects pedestrians across the train tracks. And it has a wide characteristic. It has landscaping on top. So just one of the ideas to not have a very small like underpass situation, but it could take a whole different character altogether if we have to go over. Thinking of complete streets and separated bike lanes for the characteristics of Coleman, El Camino, using them in this new district. Having better bike and pedestrian connections. This is an underpass in Netherlands. And this could be if, for example, vehicular traffic can't go through Benton to Broekhoff, can that be reimagined as a bike and pedestrian underpass instead? And then the idea of mobility hubs, like right outside the train station, you have active transportation, you have the bike, scooter share, etc. So thinking of getting everything in the same place so that people are able to get out of the station and go into the district in a much easier flow. I'll now hand it off to Poonam for the next two topic areas.
Thank you, Diksha. We're going to talk about public realm, and as we are envisioning a station area of the future, the public realm is a very important and integral part of what's going to make the district a livable district, a destination, a place that people want to come together. And as we see, obviously what we see today within the project area itself, we don't have a lot of parks and open spaces. But we do see that there are, parks that, city parks that are right outside the project boundary, as well as, the green space and public space that Santa Clara University has. But while these spaces are, there are barriers, there are physical barriers, as Diksha had pointed out earlier, in the form of the railroad tracks or El Camino Real as a major thoroughfare to get to these parks from, from within the station area. We do want to think about, as we build out, as the station area develops in the future, we are looking at the next 20 to 25 years and how the station area is going to transform. There's going to be a lot of new uses, different uses. We are going to see more density, residential density, intensity, more jobs and residents. And as we are thinking about the future of these people, we want to think about how can we make open space and public space available for these. Next. And we see a lot of opportunity, not only to connect the station area with the existing parks and open spaces that are right outside the station area, but opportunities to create new public spaces as well as connect to the public spaces that are planned in downtown. The city has recently completed re-envisioning your downtown, which is really exciting, and a lot of thought has been also given to the public realm that can be added to the downtown itself. And here we are again presented with another opportunity to envision what public space can be in this new district that's going to be around the station area. We see there's a lot of opportunity, certainly Franklin Street and the Arts Paseo, and you're going to see the Arts Paseo connection come up again as an important connector. And we have an opportunity to think about what the function of this Art Paseo is and how can that become a strong connector between downtown and the station district. Similarly, Benton Street and Benton Brokaw, which currently are not connected, but what are the opportunities to make that connection stronger and create with enhanced streetscape, how can this connector become a very strong sort of a connective tissue between downtown and station district? Now, the opportunities that we are identifying for public realm are also building on the opportunities that you saw earlier in the connectivity, under the connectivity category, because they are all related. When we think about physical connections and extension of streets, we also want to think about how they can serve a double function of being really rich and vibrant public realm. Within the station district itself, as we look at potential for new connections, those could be connections not just for vehicular streets, but they can also be a network of paseos, network of plazas that are really creating pedestrian bicycle access, but also opportunities for vibrant activity that supports economic development. And then we have an opportunity to envision a grand station plaza, because the station itself is going to be, an iconic feature. There is an opportunity for it to become an iconic feature, and that iconic feature can be not only the station building itself, but the public realm that comes with it, and what form and character that takes is something that can be shaped through this process. Yes, and thanks. What Jim was pointing out is these two bold lines that you actually see are what you had also seen, what we had shown in the connectivity opportunity is that those are opportunities to transform El Camino Real and Coleman, which are very auto-oriented thoroughfares, into complete streets. But along with complete streets, we also have an opportunity to make them into parkways because of the wide right-of-way, generous right-of-way that we have available on these two corridors. And then the next couple slides, we're actually going to show you what a linear parkway can look like. Because when we are working in urban districts where we certainly are working with limited real estate and limited land space to add greenery and create new public spaces. A linear parkway within public right-of-way can be, a really great way to sort of bring some of that green aspect and urban greening aspect to our urban districts. Next. We also have opportunities, for example, your gateway crossings actually is a really good example of how private development can offer publicly accessible parks and public spaces. Similarly, when we think about other development that will happen here in the future, there is an opportunity here to think about how do we integrate new parks, new public spaces that are programmed for multiple ages, like multi-generational public spaces, to integrate within new development, whether it is residential or non-residential. And then a couple of examples of how paseos, which are of course working as connectors, but also as public spaces, just some fun things. We can get very creative in these spaces without, doing a lot. So these are just some inspirational images for us to think about. And similarly, plazas, Station Plaza, or other public plazas of different scales integrated within the development itself. So that takes, we started with connectivity, we started with circulation, streets, mobility, and the public realm, and we saw how they are connected. And as we look at those two layers and put them together with land use, we want to start thinking about what opportunities as far as uses is concerned, and by way of the character that that this station district can actually take when we start to think about the different uses coming together. What we have currently is a number of disparate uses that don't really talk to each other. They're not always complementing each other. They kind of exist on their own. But again, the gateway crossing is sort of starting to change some of the character there, and we are seeing what the potential is and how things can be different as we look into the future. Disha, if we can go to the next slide. So we wanted to start with just thinking about starting with downtown and downtown as the heart of the city. And, the station itself and the area around the station, immediately in the vicinity of the station, organically lends itself to being an activity node because of the number of people that are going to be coming there, coming together, and just, with the exchange of multimodal mobility and all of that. And how can we then leverage that coming together of the people into creating an active node, an active district right around the station itself? And then there is another opportunity to create a district or an activity node within what is currently as a light industrial, the light industrial area. And we are going to talk a little bit more about, how we can re-envision the light industrial. But before we start to get into that, we kind of just wanted to start with these activity nodes. And if you think back to, the opportunities that we identified in the public realm, as well as the connectivity opportunities, all of these kind of really line up nicely for why Benton Brokaw and Franklin sort of formed this strong connective couplet, and what opportunities exist along these corridors to activate the spaces. So building on this, if we kind of wanted to add now the layer of different uses. And this is where, we want to sort of allow ourselves to think differently, think big, look into the future, and think about, what experiences and what kind of a character do we want to see in this new district. So start right around the station area. It does lend itself to an employment-focused or jobs-focused use. There is a potential for all of these districts to be mixed use, but some of these districts are going to lend themselves to having a higher focus on one type of use just because of where they are located. So right around the station, the opportunity for a more jobs-focused use is much higher, and it can still be a mixed-use district. As you go further north from the station area, because Gateway Crossings already is starting to, it's going to be the catalyst for the residential use, that residential use can grow, and there can be another residential district that is in the vicinity of Gateway Crossings. And then the industrial area, the light industrial area, is something, I think it's a very, very exciting opportunity for all of you and for the city to think about what the future of light industrial is. There are going to be there already are a number of buildings that will come to the end of their life cycle over the next 20 years. And do we want to rebuild it exactly how it is now, or how it was 20 years ago? Or do we want to envision the light industrial district into something different? Is there a way to modernize it? Is there a way to make it into something that's a creative economy, that's a place for innovation, for incubating businesses? And so there is a lot of potential there, and a lot of very, very exciting things that can happen in that particular district. On the south side of the tracks in El Camino Real, we see again a great opportunity here to connect with downtown, not to compete with downtown, but to actually complement and build off of the synergy that the energy that downtown is going to bring, but create a synergy with the new uses that we envision with Santa Clara University and the 4 blocks between Lafayette and El Camino Real, which are part of Santa Clara University. How do we create that synergy with downtown, with the residential neighborhood, with university? How, like the student life. And so that's something that also can be, really thought about as we think about these. We're going to keep moving. I know I got very excited here, but we're going to get even more excited. We wanted to, really bring just some precedent images and possibilities for what can happen here. This is, great rendering by It's a project by WRNS Studio. It's currently underway in Redwood City. And, this kind of like shows the potential in the light industrial district, what we have chosen to call it as our industrial arts district. And we can come up with another name, but the idea is that the character, we don't want to lose the economic base and the industrial base that is there. We want to, we can keep the character and give it a really unique character compared to all the other districts. But there are very creative ways to make this into a destination, with maker spaces or artisanal, a space for artists, a space for people to come and have different experiences. Another example of an adaptive reuse in San Francisco. Let's keep moving. This is an example of an office building and a plaza. So how can we integrate public realm within the office district that you just saw on the diagram, and then a residential mixed-use district? Again, there's a lot of opportunity to bring housing, much needed housing, higher density, medium density housing, but in a mixed use setting. And so again, bringing back this diagram that Diksha had shared earlier, as far as the user group profile that we see today, and how would this transform? And you see like those circles and the bubbles are increasing in size as you look at, the number of residents and employees and transit riders and visitors and so on and so forth.
As the user groups grow in size, their overlap with transit increases, right? Because you'd like to shift over to a more transit-friendly environment. So in the first diagram, if you click back, there's a little bit of transit use, but what we'd like to happen is these uses grow, that it increases the transit usage.
And and I think
Should we
Jim,
just
it's all
transition?
yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna sort of bring this to conclusion to sort of set up some discussion. And what I wanted to do is just zero into the station area and what I think is this fascinating puzzle of connectivity. And, so this is sort of taking all those layers that Poonam and Diksha described, layering them all together, the land use, the public space, the circulation, and then zooming in, right? And then plunking the BART station plan right in there. So that's pretty much the plan as BART has has conveyed it in their current progress. And then really start to look at this and how do these flows want to work? There's pedestrian and bike flows, there are bus flows, and then there's, of course, the transit flows themselves. And all of those want to, and there's probably a certain degree of vehicular flows, although that really wants to take a back seat, so to speak, as we become more pedestrian friendly, more bike friendly, and more transit friendly. So if you start to imagine these flows coming into the station area, crossing the tracks in different ways, how can that happen? And it becomes a really interesting design puzzle. And so this is really just showing some very, just some very general opportunities of the Benton-Brokaw connection going under, the existing pedestrian underpass shown as the blue arrows, the bus loop coming into the station as the orange dashed line, some sort of a Franklin Arts Paseo flow that could actually flow over the tracks and then somehow miraculously land in the green space over in Gateway Crossings. And so it's an opportunity. It's not meant to be a solution, but it's really more about how can we start to think about how these flows work and how they complement the land uses that are going to become much more intensive in this area. And so in doing this, it made me think of my trip to Netherlands. And I saw a number of train stations there that just completely enthralled me, you know, in terms of the degree of creativity that was applied to these same sorts of issues. How are they handling the flows? And then how are they designing that into some sort of elegant solution? So I just want to walk through a couple of those places. The first one is in Utrecht. So this is a, actually, that's not Utrecht, that's a Delft. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the Utrecht station, and it's fascinating. So they took a very bold approach. This is a bigger city than Santa Clara. I think it's maybe 2 times bigger than Santa Clara, just for reference. But they built a station that really was the crossing over the tracks. And at that level, there's also a plaza, which you can see just to the left of the station itself. So all that's at the upper level, and that's all pedestrian. Pedestrians just flow back and forth through the station, through the plaza, and then if you keep going left, through the retail commercial complex that sits right next to the station, and from there you flow into Old Town, and it's beautifully integrated, and I'll show a picture of that. To the right, you come off of that station platform, then you go down these grand stairs, and then you're down into a plaza surrounded by office commercial. So this whole idea of a workplace node close to the station is actually working quite nicely here. Then you have on the lower level, you have the trains that go underneath, but you also have buses down at that level. And those buses flow in and they interface with the train platform, and then they flow out. And you also have bicycles at the lower level, and they are serious flows of bicycle. This isn't just 1 or 2 people, you know, chaining their bike to a tree and getting on the train. This is hundreds and hundreds of bicycles flowing into here, and they actually flow underneath the plaza that you see here into this massive bicycle parking garage that's beautifully designed. So those are the main components, and I've got a little photograph of each. So this is the station volume itself, crossing over the tracks, and you know, it's a beautiful, elegant structure, obviously. This is what it looks like inside. There's all kinds of activation and retail, as well as the, you know, the escalators and stairs that take you down to the various platforms. Next slide. And then this is the plaza. So this, you come out of the station, you go across the plaza, and then on the right is where the retail center begins. And then you see this little glass pavilion in the foreground here, or the mid-ground. I'll come back to that, but yeah, go to the next slide. So here are the bicycles. Now they're flowing in underneath this plaza. So they're coming from city streets at this grade, and they're flowing right in to this garage. And if you see the next, this is looking above from the plaza down to where those bicycles are flowing in and out. And then you can see the city beyond, it's down at that grade, right? And then in the next slide, this is the interior. So it's beautiful space. It's well lit. You've got this sort of double-decker racks where people put their bikes. You can see in the background, the bikes circulating on ramps at 2 different levels. And it's very efficient. You just flow right into here. You find your parking space, you put your bike in there, and then you go up. And in the next slide, this is where you come out. So it's this little glass pavilion that comes up from the bike parking, puts you in the main plaza, and then you go to your destination, either to the station on one side or to the little shopping area on the other side. These are the buses that are down at the lower level. And then this is another pedestrian connection, you know, a little bit of distance away from the main station crossing. And, you know, it's very generous, it's wide, it's nicely designed, it's well lit. So it's just another way to sort of bridge that gap over the tracks. And then this is going to the office side of the station. So you go down this grand stairway, then you're down at the city grade, and then these are all office buildings around this, this beautiful plaza. And that's looking back the other way from the plaza up towards the station. offices. And then this is the shopping center on the other side of the station. So you flow across that plaza, you go into this beautiful shopping center, which is also straddling a canal. It's amazing. The Dutch will take on anything in terms of engineering. Fortunately, we don't have to do this here in Santa Clara. We don't have to straddle a canal. So that will make it a little easier. But then you flow through the shopping center and then you pop out right here in this plaza, and then you're basically reintegrated with the old town fabric, and that happens, very elegantly. So that's Utrecht. I was completely geeking out on all of that when I was there. This is The Hague, which is another beautiful station. Again, this is a bigger city. It's not the same scale of infrastructure that would be appropriate for Santa Clara, but I think there's still some interesting cues here and some things to think about. So in the next slide, you can see the regional train is at the lower level, and then the city light rail is up at the upper level. Those are the red cars up there. It's all under the same canopy. It's all very easily connected for connections from one mode to the other. And in the next slide, so this is the concourse at the lower level where the regional trains are. Next slide. That's the upper level where the light rail is. So you might get off your regional train, go up the escalator to this level, get on the light rail, and then just go a short distance to your destination, somewhere in the city nearby. And then the whole concourse is very nicely connected to the neighboring development district. So straight ahead is an office district, again, putting that workplace assemblage right next to the station. It's very efficient. Workers can come right into the station, flow into their offices very easily. But then these connections are also activated by retail that you can see on the left side here. The next slide is a video. So this is now in the public plaza. You can see the light rail coming out of that station, making its way to the city, to this beautiful plaza. So just some flows and things to think about. And then how does that apply to our situation here? How can we be creative about how we're handling these flows? And I think that's kind of discussion all about. Okay, that's that. That was not quite an hour, but we want to roll right into a discussion. So let's go to. We have a sort of a format which we can deviate from, but we wanted to kind of start from this diagram and say, hey, how can we envision these three nodes that Poonam talked about, that each have very different characters. Downtown node is what is defined in the precise plan, local destination, beverage, it has some retail, it has some cultural attractions. That's sort of one mix of uses. And it has residential above, but it also has some office above. Say it's largely a residential district, but with an office center around. The station area is a little bit different. It has a lot of flows coming in and out, people using the regional and local transit, potential for workplace, and what are the activators in that. And then the industrial arts node north. And we started to get interested in this relationship between the residential district and the industrial arts each other, because is that an opportunity to have a rather unique environment? Sort of live in this neighborhood that has this edgy relationship with all of this innovation going on, just 1 or 2 blocks away. And, in that are opportunities to go in there and maybe experience some arts. Maybe there's some brew pubs in there that are where they're actually brewing the beer, but then they also have a beer garden. So it starts to take on that overlap between where people are living, but this other sort of creative world that's happening.
Or also, can the residential, that at the edge, can that take a different form? Is that like, an artist loft or just, I think there's opportunities on both sides, like, what that the transition, I think as much as exciting as the districts themselves are to envisioning the transitions and those edges where these districts meet is equally exciting. And I think that that's where the opportunity for being creative in terms of the uses, the ground floor activation and the public realm is where a lot of the life is going to be.
So how do we imagine these places so they're not competing with each other? We don't want the station area to outdo the downtown, right? We want those to complement each other. We don't want the downtown and the industrial arts to try to vie for attention and compete. We want those to be two distinct destinations. They're both successful in their own right. How do we do that? And I think we'd love to hear some of your ideas on that. That's not where we need to limit the question. You saw something else that you want to talk about, a public space opportunity, connectivity opportunity, maybe a constraint that we didn't quite get right, whatever, feel free to bring it up. But we thought that this might be a good beginning point.
So before we take comments, maybe let's all take a minute to absorb everything that we just went through. Maybe we can close our eyes and imagine ourselves getting off of the train station and think about the experience of the space that we want to come to. What should that landing look like? And what should that potential office district or some other district, based on the ideas that you might have, how would we want to envision it? What are we seeing in the public realm? What kind of character are we seeing in the buildings? What kind of mode do we want as soon as we get out? Are we walking to our office? Are we taking a bike? Are we getting on a scooter? Are we taking the bus to get somewhere? Let's just think of that as a user and our experience, and maybe talk about how we want to envision these spaces. Yes.
And don't be shy.
I think this kind of overlaps a lot with what the Cultural Commission is looking at with the arts and green spaces and maker spaces and art space. That's all the stuff that we've been talking about in our meetings. I think what makes sense, at least for me, is the thing that kind of joins all of the spaces together would be the green space. When you were talking about the elevated walkways, what really came to mind is the High Line in New York. And I know that had a different purpose and reason why they retrofitted that, but it really makes sense when you're talking about green spaces, the elevated walkways and things like that. Something that makes it somewhere families want to go, that they would just want to walk on a Saturday with their dogs, and that really does bring together the need for pedestrian walkways, but then also the beautifying it, the green spaces, and then also somehow incorporating the arts. So like a public arts walk, something like that, which we kind of incorporated, or to incorporate, but that's something that we definitely would put into those spaces. But I think the main connector for this would be the green space.
The High Line is a great analogy. Love that.
Yeah.
Like, I definitely agree with High Line. That's a really great example. I used to have an office right by there, so I would walk it every day with my coworkers, So it's a really great activation. So meatpacking it's definitely something that came to mind when you were talking about the industrial arts district. I mean, we don't have anything we're converting really over there, because we were talking about how a lot of those are end of life. So it will be some sort of recreation in some way, but I can see those as opportunities, coming as a community member as well. Those are opportunities closer to your airport that you can actually have a little more density in housing because we're coming into so much pressure. But it definitely should be some sort of mixed use in some way, right? So it, you know, not just offices, maybe housing, and like having a brewery, you know, as you were saying. We used to have a brewery that was right off of Memorex, right next to a train tracks, just a little bit down the ways. I'm like riding down the train and I can actually see people hanging out like in the back, like looking at trains going by, you know, stuff like that. It's actually really useful. Like I would love to sit there having a beer, watching planes, like going up and down the runway. That would be really cool. You know, I think in the downtown discussions, we all talked about having rooftops, you know, rooftop bars and stuff like that. You can overlook the area. I think like, you know, thinking about that, we also have to be like sensitive about some of our historical resources, definitely in the area, particularly the depot. I know there had been discussions about doing like a flyover, I mean, like a walkway to go across the train tracks. That's detrimental to the resource. So that's kind of like been knocked back like multiple times. You know, one of the things that came to mind was like, you know, during stuff that I was doing with Caltrain is Mountain View for Castro. They're actually doing a grade separation under crossing. So I can send you a link for that particular project. That is kind of like a nicer example of how they do an underpass under an expressway, actually. So that's something, an inspiration we can take for like part of the connectivity between the two sides of the track as well. Because we, you know, if we want to do like a drive-through, well, here, rolling back, coming from my Caltrain hat, we're never going to open it up for like add grade car crossing because of grade separation issues. And we don't have a lot of runway between the two sides on Brokaw to actually open up that way, but like making it more of like a whole street as a pedestrian mall, it's going to be really great for connectivity in both ways. So like that's kind of how I envision it. Like as I get off the train, it would be easy to go out. I've walked over to a couple of soccer games in the last couple of months. It's not pretty. Like going on the other side where all the construction sites are, but like if Great Gateway Crossings actually like built out and actually had that paseo that like we gave them so much input into as they were doing design, that would make it a lot more pleasant for that experience. That's all I have.
Big comments. I'm not convinced we don't have enough runway to go under with Brokaw. But you might be right, but we should look at it.
When you mean runway, do you mean the distance like between the El Camino and the grade in order to get underneath the grade?
Yep, exactly.
I do see that, you know, from the historic mindset of the depot, getting off the train, you're in the historic area. You're dropped right there. And I can see that the tracks actually lend themselves to that delineation as you're talking about the kind of the techie side. You know, you go down, you go over to the other side, and all of a sudden it can be brand new, you know, high tech looking, everything like that. And the tracks actually lend themselves to that place where the two they don't mix, but the tracks allow them to be blended together. So, the other thing about green space is it would seem that with the water district plant being right there, with the pump being right there, that site is actually an opportunity to have that area as a plaza with green space in it right there.
Water district.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a water pump like smack in the middle of the parking lot.
Yeah.
I also want to highlight that's also a site of archaeological interest for our third mission that is no longer there. So there's actually some things that are under the pavement there that could be interesting to highlight if we make that into a plaza.
Interesting. Third mission.
Yeah, the mission at Santa Clara University right now is the fourth mission. The third mission is actually like right in the front where the big green space is in front of the new building. You can actually see the lines that are highlighted where the mission building is. So Santa Clara University has that.
On the west side of El Camino Real.
Yeah, it is, but like the old mission actually kind of crosses where El Camino is as well.
Yeah.
So like the walls actually like go all the way down and stuff like that.
Yeah, cool.
Part of Franklin Street near El Camino is sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
So I have a couple of points to add as well. So first thing is I actually went to Europe quite recently. Friends and I, we did a remote work trip in Europe. So we went to 3 countries actually. And obviously we paid a lot of attention to the transportation infrastructure. I'd say visiting a bunch of train stations all over the continent, the number one thing my friends, and even looking at online surveys, what people seem to care about is how long it takes to get from the train station to the destination. So what should be like the number one priority is making it very, very quick and easy to get from the platform to the street level. So ideally, you want to make that as streamlined as possible. And once you get onto a street level, it should be very, very easy to access all the destinations around the train station. So that means a lot of pedestrian connectivity. Make sure we have a lot of density near the station itself. And we have to make sure there's a lot of ways to cross the tracks because right now we only have a couple of crossings. Now, talking about the way we actually cross the tracks, right? I actually tried measuring how much distance there is between the tracks and El Camino and even on the other side. And technically a pedestrian underpass is possible, but it is going to be quite tight. And there's no way we can get a vehicular underpass in that space, which is why I seriously think we should consider just talking to whoever's like in charge of Caltrain or whoever's in charge of the tracks to see if full grade separation is possible. Pretty much all the European stations I've seen, except for Utrecht, the tracks are either below grade or they're elevated on them and on an embankment. And that just makes it so much easier to get from one side to the other. And once Gateway is completed and once the station area is built out, there's probably going to be tens of thousands of people living there, tens of thousands of jobs, new office buildings. And there's going to be a lot of travel across the tracks. And honestly, couple of pedestrian underpasses may not even cut it to meet the demand. It's not going to be convenient for bikes and probably want to have a way for buses to get from one side to the other as well. And third thing is, in terms of how a station I think should be designed, my favorite station of all is actually Cologne Hauptbahnhof, which is the main station in Cologne, Germany. It's a very simple station, right? Tracks are about 20 feet above the street level. Under the tracks, you have a concourse where you obviously have the escalators to get up to the tracks. You have a bunch of shops, bike parking, bus loops. Everything is underneath the tracks itself. You do have like, I guess, a small bus turnout next to the tracks, but everything is pretty well self-contained and compact. You have a small plaza in front of the station, which is what every single European main station seems to have. And the parking lot in front of the station could serve as the plaza. And really beyond that, that's pretty much all the station takes up. There's no like fancy overpasses. All the crossings are at grade because the tracks are above street level. There's not multiple levels. It's just the platform level and the street. Very simple station, but it's super convenient to get from the platform to the ground. A lot of destinations around the train station. Everything's 100% mixed use. There's like zero delineation between like residential, commercial, offices. Everything is just mixed in together. I honestly think that should be the vision we go for with this station area, like 100% mixed use, no discrimination between offices, housing, commercial, and just focus on making it very, very quick and easy to get from the platform itself to the destinations.
What was the city in Germany?
Cologne.
Cologne.
Yeah, Cologne, yeah.
I have a couple ideas on how to blend the residential and industrial arts area. I do really like the idea of brewery or some kind of bakery, something like that. But what also might work with that is some recreational uses where they require kind of an industrial type of building, like a climbing gym or pickleball courts, something that, requires an industrial type building, but would allow some blending of the residential with what's now more of a down and dirty kind of automotive type of industrial area.
I like the climbing gym idea. It's like the one at the Presidio. That would be really cool because you can just climb and look at planes.
I could see, oh, sorry. go ahead.
I was just gonna make some comments. Yeah, when I think about this, I always think about, well, if we had buildings that were actually cool and we were repurposing them, what would they be? I mean, we're dealing with a train station. Well, you know, typically that was transporting goods and stuff. And so if we had warehouses still there, so I always thought that the downtown would, because it's surrounded by historic homes, it's got a little different, you know, less bold vibe in terms of, or less grunge, I guess, warehouse. And that as you get away, you get a little more edgy and grungy or more futuristic in terms of the architecture. I mean, that was a great example. And I'm glad you showed photos because it, for a lot of people, I think photos just tell a lot of, it's like what's possible, especially the Elko Yards, which I'm now going to look into for Redwood City, because that looked quite interesting. You know, you had almost like, you know, agricultural barn shape for this very tall industrial building. And that was quite amazing. And I could see that being maybe more in the industrial arts area and then maybe more warehousing. I mean, Gateway Crossings, I was heavily involved with that developer and trying to do more brick warehousey kind of vibe right around the station that you can fill with anything, office, you know, and I'd agree, mixed use adds more energy. And I'm saddened that the Gateway Crossings did it more piecemeal, which is the way things were done, where office is in one place and housing's in another, and it's a little stale in some way. As for the connections, boy, and you know, if we could, sure, if we could get Caltrain to go underground, I think no one would argue with that. It's a tall order. Similarly, though, doing an overpass, it's an opportunity to create something that's iconic, right? I mean, if people are driving underneath it in the trains, it could be like, hey, here we are. If it's something done amazing and not just boring. Simple overpass. And so how you integrate that with the station, I'm on the station design committee. The hard thing with all this is there's different entities and they're all working independently. And that's going to be our frustration because we can, you know, we all have great ideas and it's just how does it all come together? And that's not easy in this day and age. And so, but we have to shoot for, you know, the stars and the underpass, you know, I was just in Miami and what was really cool, and Dan's talked about even the downtown having a what do you call it? Some kind of transit that connects station. What do you call it? Station to the downtown. Yeah, but what did you call the transportation? A trolley. Yeah. Okay, so we were in, you know, there's a lot of retirees in Miami, and we were at a hotel way away from where we needed to go for the downtown, and this guy comes by, you want a free ride? It's these retired guys in these glorified, they're like, I don't know, 12 people could fit on it. They're like golf carts. And he just gets tips. So he's going up and down the street and it was fun. You know, we learned about his life and everything. So it doesn't always have to be grand. It can be, that was a really creative way to get people. And that was in several cities that they had that. And I just thought that was, you know, it's not a rickshaw, but it is something different. Rickshaw would be cool in its own way.
I think historically, there was a trolley
Yeah,
that ran
yeah.
from the station to the downtown.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so yeah, that runway that we have to go underneath, you know, again, the interesting thing is in Santa Barbara, the freeway, you know, disconnected people and the people, I think pedestrians had to walk underneath the freeway. They did an overpass, but I think they're reversing it now because they felt like the pedestrians going down under, it's not a great experience, right? And that's similar to what our train station is right now. Whereas they're going to reverse it, I'm pretty sure, because it kind of, once the, that industrial district in, what the heck's it called, in Santa Barbara, it's a really cool area if you haven't been. It's not super tall warehouses, but it's got boutiques and then there's wineries, beer, outside music, and some old buildings, but it was, that's what you know, in the industrial arts, I think it has more of an edge, you know, edginess to it. So anyway, good comments for everybody. Looking forward to it. Thanks for the photos. Yeah.
Very.
Oh, yeah.
San Pedro Square, these open areas where people, actually more of a Haymarket where you could provide, as a shopping venue for the residential areas that will undoubtedly expand in these areas versus just going to a brewery, but you could also go to the butcher and creamery and the dairy and the bakery, et cetera. Do your Sunday shopping.
See. It could be that the tip of the industrial arts there at the end of Brokaw is more, culinary, food and beverage, but then it transitions as you get into the wider part to other, light industrial uses.
Yeah, Jim, I love Utrecht. I'm going to start there. I was going to do the third, but I've seen that station. It's incredible. And I love the idea of the three areas as far as transition, because you have on one side the downtown, the quad, the history, as Rob said, Santa Clara University. And then juxtaposed to that on Coleman, you have offices, and they are what they are, but they're always going to be there. The thing that I keep waiting for on the industrial arts side, we're talking about arts, and I'm the oldest guy here, but I've got a 17-year-old, is music, right? And that's when I talk to the kids at Santa Clara University, that's what they want. There's no music from, it's just like a Mojave Desert until you get to Oakland or San Francisco. So if that can be included in that arts hub, in that arts district, there's another city in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, where they have a district just like that with three, different music venues that are incredible, incredible. Four bars, put one on top of the other. So it's great. So let me see what else I want to say.
More arts than, not just industrial.
Yeah, correct.
Arts.
Yeah, so you have industrial, but you have, something that at 5 o'clock that goes away, and then after 5 o'clock you have other things going on. I've got to talk as far as the at grade, crossing and what's going on with that. So we too, over the last couple of months, we've been busy with the DOT and the city, and I've got an update on that. The city is now actively going after grants for reconnected communities to connect Benton and Brokaw, which is great news. They've assigned 2 people on city staff, but more importantly, they're getting an external consultant to come in and say, to your point, does it make sense? Is El Camino too close? How do we do this? And there's 2 grants. There's one that's a construction grant that everyone's after, but there's more importantly, I think for all of us, is a planning grant. And that's where they bring their experts in and they tell us, can we do that? Again, that's not going to be the main connector between the 3 areas or the 2 areas, the office and the residential, but it could do the trolley and ped and bike. And I like the idea, as far as if you want to walk, there's passageways over. But that's underway, and the deadline on application for that grant is September 20th, just so you guys know that. So our group is, actively pursuing that and kind of dogging that just to make sure that we understand that that's an option and where we're going from there. So, yeah, I love the comments. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, I have a couple comments. I guess the first thing that occurred to me when I first saw the picture was the kind of when you said like there's an office area and like a residential. I was actually a little disappointed because I'd always kind of thought like you'd have more residential maybe by the station and the office would kind of be spread further out. So I'd like to understand a little bit about what was driving it. I appreciate the comment earlier about like let's mix it all up. That I think that might be a way to go, but I'd also like to understand like what goes behind the thought, like does office do better near a station? Does residential, what contributes to that? And then kind of related to that is like how much office space can we support here? How much residential units could we build? Should we be thinking about 10,000 units in this area? Or is it more or less? Like what, how do we come up with those numbers as to what should be, in this area? Because that might tell you like how much office do I really need? How much residential, or how do we make it flexible so you can use it for different uses depending on what dynamically wants to get built. And so that's kind of like my feedback there. I do like this idea of the industrial arts area. Unfortunately, like we don't have any cool old industrial buildings to repurpose. They're all kind of that like 50, 60, 70, kind of low slung,
Those are
commercial.
gonna be the new cool.
Those are gonna be cool at some point. Yeah, I just like the old warehouses that everybody likes to go into from like the docking. Maybe, but yeah, I think that to me the sad part is it almost feels like you have to start over there. But to your point, I guess earlier, it is older, so that is an opportunity. I also understand there's some height restriction things with the airport. So like I think our best bet for a lot of the density and such is to push it south away from the airport, which makes me kind of understand like why you might do industrial and it might stay as kind of a low slung area. I'm curious about what those restrictions are. It'd be good to understand those within the design. I like some of the station ideas. I do want to be somewhat realistic or figure out what we can do. Is that VTA has plans for what they're doing for the station, and they are particularly inflexible. I'm putting it very politely about what they do. I would love to have ideas about how to influence them, and if there's anything we can do on our side to help drive that and mesh with what they want to do. But I just call that out as a risk, maybe within the area. And then I do want to mention a little bit about the historical part, because I'm not sure actually everybody understands all the historical nature of the station, especially based on some of the comments I heard from other folks. So the station itself is historical, but part of the listing is the signals that are next to the police station. And the fact that it is an original station with an original signaling tower and everything, that is one of the reasons why it's historical. So doing things like elevating the tracks, moving them around, putting something that flies over and blocks that actually hurts the historical nature of the station. And so that would actually hurt its listing requirement. So I don't think people actually understand that. I know it's come up occasionally. I think when they did high-speed rail, that was actually one thing that pushed against, I think, one of the plans where they were going to elevate the high-speed rail through there. People should just be aware of that, because as much as like I like the idea of the flyovers or other connectivity, if you start messing with that grade, that actually affects that kind of historical nature of the area. So a lot of the underpasses, that wouldn't disturb that, right? Because you wouldn't be changing the relationship. But I just thought people should be aware of that. It seems like a lot of people kind of forget that when they're looking at the station.
Depot's actually a state historical landmark.
Yeah, and so it might even affect its like state registry, which I think would be concerning. Like we wouldn't want to like put a flyover on, and then like one of the reasons why it's listed on the state historical register is because of that relationship between the depot and the original signaling that's still there, and they kept it. I think it's like a water
Tower
and
was
stuff,
built
the
in
tower.
1926. Went into operation in 1926.
Yep.
But the depot's been there since 1863.
Yep. Yeah. So that whole, my understanding, that whole relationship is tied together a little bit. So just want to keep that in mind as we look at how to repurpose it. I did like the idea somebody said about using the parking lot as like maybe a way of doing a plaza or kind of a place to activate, because there are those issues that were brought up about historical, and then also just the fact that it's a supply of water for most of the old quad in the area. That's where my drinking water comes from. That maybe is a way to compromise on a nice way to like make a good space there. And then I just wanted to say like let more flexibility having this office and versus residential. I'd like to be able to see how to trade that off and not just be stuck with one,
Yeah.
one use.
So yeah, I wanted to come back to that comment about office. I think your reflections are excellent. And I think that that is something that we need to wrestle with moving forward when we get into the development of concepts here. Do we even want to specify, where we ended up in the downtown is it's all just form-based. It's not land use restrictive. There are blocks where office is encouraged, and we do that through the height regulations, but nothing is disallowed, so it can sort of react to the market. There is this sort of classical relationship between workplace and station. I think that's just through a lot of trial and error and best practices, having workers go directly to their offices rather than flowing through a residential area is better. It eliminates conflicts, but nothing is absolute. So I think your comments of, do we want to be this restrictive? Do we want to let it mix a little bit more? Is this too much office? The other thing we're dealing with is the market. The market's not going to be ready for office for quite some time. So if we want to encourage some office near the station, we should look at sort of strategies that bank those parcels for a little while, and let the market catch up. And then focus on the residential that there is market for right now.
And I think part of the challenge is the way you have this drawn, like, at least I think I understand, like, Gateway Crossings, that's already residential. I don't know if that light blue block, that's supposed to be the BART train station there. That's not part of your office, right?
Which one?
The one underneath the train
That's,
symbol?
yeah, just a.
Okay, that's just the train station. Okay, so
That's
you've accounted for that in the yellow. And then on the south side, I know that's office today, but I think there's actually a development application to build housing there, like actively going on, right? So that's a challenge. So.
Which is part of it is still shown as residential, like further down.
Mhm.
But there's some overlap with this office projections with that project. One of the other things around this like office residential conversation is that it's much easier to get people to ride a train if at the end of your destination, you're getting off to an office. But if you put a lot of residential density, they might not have a use for the train because the train might not be taking them to places where they need to go. So if you want to increase ridership around train stations and going to trains, like office really helps with that. One of the things that our market study was looking at, and it's going to be finalized soon, and we will share it with all of you as well, is that there are some office spaces in the area at the moment with low rents, but they have very low vacancies in comparison to the rest of Santa Clara and the market area. So which seemed like a positive inclination towards office. That is not to say that it's in the near future to have that kind of office density, but there is a potential for the area to grow if we are able to reserve some space for office. So that's the idea of like reservation, because otherwise housing market is the strongest and it will take over completely.
I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions for you. Excellent presentation. I think you showed a lot of really interesting ideas. What I didn't see a lot of particularly was assessments of person flows. I heard you say the word flows quite a bit, but I think you need to put some numbers around that. I don't know what the timeline is for you to do a travel market assessment, but I think that that's going to directly inform quite a lot of this plan. I think that I heard you say to make this plan less autocentric, and that's certainly something I would be interested in. But there needs to be some thought given to what types of person flows are likely to occur. And those are things that can be forecasted. using some fairly decades-long tested methodologies. The reason that I'm very interested in understanding that is because one concept that I did not hear you describe was BRT and the potential for bus rapid transit through these corridors that have high capacity. You mentioned a couple of those. And, you know, I'm trying to think about how to transform transportation. And I understand that I'm not an urban planner. I don't have a degree in placemaking. And that's not necessarily what excites me, because I'm very interested in providing opportunities for people to live a better life. And transportation is the way that that's achieved to a large degree. So I'm actually very excited to be a transportation planner because I feel like that's something that I'm aspiring to all the time. So I'd like to understand better the equity implications of this entire station area. I want to have a better sense of what is the makeup of these residents? What is the makeup of these employees? And not just today, but in the future, according to projections. I'm sure the city of Santa Clara has projections for these things. If they don't, I know VTA does. I've worked on VTA's travel demand forecasting model for decades. And so I'm quite familiar with those resources. I want to understand who are the underserved populations and what are their needs? And are there opportunities within this station area for those folks to have more resources and to be able to have better access for the kinds of things that they need access for? When you start also thinking about, you know, some of the comments they were interesting comments that you were making about the absorption of employment space and obviously these land uses have to be somewhat market driven to actually achieve the kinds of outcomes that you want, because you can put a plan together with what you would really like to be there, but the market has to be able to respond. So it's a really important aspect to try and understand what that might be. What I guess where I was going with that was that people's commutes in the Bay Area are quite long. And I don't think that's really going to change in the future. So when you were saying that perhaps residential development is not as ideal in the station area, I'm not sure that I quite agree, because most households now and in the future have more than one worker in them. And it's very unlikely, you know, when you think about how do people make choices about where to live versus where they work, when there's two workers involved, it gets complicated. You cannot really optimize your work location and your residential location. And so one person usually gets stuck with the long commute, the other one less so, or maybe they just split it in half. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I just want to suggest that there may be reasons why residential does make sense for this area. I don't know if it's particularly comfortable to be a resident right on top of a train station. I grew up in Brooklyn. I lived between the intersection of two elevated train stations in a 23-story building, and I lived on the 20th floor. And I didn't find that to be problematic, but I mean, that was all I knew. So I would, you know, I really do want to see these opportunities to be a little bit more transformative in terms of how they address needs of a very wide spectrum of users.
Can I?
Those are
jump on
great.
that?
Yeah, great comments. And before you jump in,
Yep.
Dan, we will be quantifying the flows. So as we start to build concepts, with, you know, different sort of density scenarios for the various land uses, then those are going to be generating, you know, the people flows that you're talking about, and we'll be looking at the modal breakdown between pedestrian and bike and car and transit. So, you know, we will get to that. So that's a great comment. And your comments about equity, absolutely, we need to bake that into this plan. So thanks for that.
All I was going to thank you for those comments, because what I see, and I get a little tongue tied at the end, is, I mean, my motivation sitting here is, you know, we want a great plan. Right now we have 2 station area plans. We have, you guys are calling it north and south. It's, I think, east and west, whatever. But how the hell did we get cars off the roads? And it's a small little area of the Silicon Valley, but it could be an example, you know, if you get the right, you know, be it, you know, a rapid transit system, Jill, as Jill said, or a trolley or whatever. If it's taking cars off roads, and it can be an example to other areas like this. And I've said this in the last meeting, if you go back to 1866, this little cluster that we're talking about right here has been here 200 years. You go up the road, Sunnyvale, same thing. You want TOD planning, you look at before cars. And this is an exact, perfect way of doing it if you can connect this through a non-automotive way. And it's not walking. Americans, you know, I'm sorry, we're all in great shape here, but Americans are overweight. They're not getting in, you know, they're not walking a mile, not getting on bikes. So that's why I'm so obsessed with this, you know, this DOT thing. And part of your answer is going to come from this, and I got to look at it, the exploratory part of the DOT. But a question, Leslie's going to kill me. Question to the city is, right now we've got X number of workers on Coleman. Do we know how many workers those are? If they were at capacity, what is Royku? What is, you know, what are all those buildings right now? How many people, if at capacity, which we all will be in 2 years? I mean, I'm working 6 days a week right now in my office. It's going to happen. So at capacity, where are we at right now? And then what I think we all need to be looking for is not, somebody said this, are we looking 20 years back or are we looking 50 years forward? Coleman is going to be it residential or office, it's going to be a mess. And it's a hot mess now with cars. I think if we triple the number of offices, and those developers want to do that, we've got to have some kind of non-automotive connector to connect these 2 areas. And I think that could be an example. I don't want delusions of grandeur, but it could be an example for other areas to take. So is there a way of finding that out? Leslie, what the projections looking like?
General rule of thumb in those Class A office buildings is about 100 to 200 square feet per person.
Mhm.
So I think it's about 1.5 million square feet across all of the Coleman Highline buildings. If you do that math, I think it gets you to around 10,000.
We're at 10,000 now.
That's not, you know, those aren't 100% occupied.
No. Yeah, but let's say we got 10,000 cars and we grow our thing 4X. Then what do we got? A parking lot. So great points.
If what you're describing is already in the works, I guess what I'm wondering is then, you know, why would we even think that this station area needs to support that much office space if it's completely surrounded by office that has the potential to be 4 times as dense as it is now?
That's up to the city zoning. So, you know, I'm not saying I want that. I just think it's gonna happen. And if you've got a train station right there with 4 different lines, we have got a sane way of doing what you're saying, connecting them non-automotively to that track. And I get up in the, this is the thing, everybody goes, oh, Europeans, they hate cars. Europeans hate cars. You know, they're train crazy or bike crazy. Amsterdam, they're bike crazy. They make the greatest cars in the world, Lamborghini, Porsche, Ferrari. The thing that they like isn't trains, it's choice. They get up in the morning, they go, do I take my Porsche or do I get on a train? Because they're both right outside. Get on a bike, get on a last mile, you know, connector to a train. And that's what we have to get to. Or American cities are a mess because of how we planned in the 50s. And I'm pontificating. But
Can I just comment on do we have enough office question? So I think, you know, looking at this from a regional perspective, the whole Bay Area is becoming a, you know, work to home connection ecosystem. It used to be everybody commuted to San Francisco and then everybody commuted home. And now it's completely redistributed to nodes throughout the Bay Area. And all of those nodes are both workplace and residential. And so I think, you know, more than trying to dictate what this land use should be here at the station, I think we want to provide the flexibility of the land use so that we fit into that regional ecosystem, right? Of workplace to residential, efficient workplace to residence connection. Some people will live here and they'll take transit to their workplace. Some people will live somewhere else and they'll take transit, you know, here. And we would just want to provide the opportunity to, you know, to grow that ecosystem around transit, right? To leverage these transit resources that we have, because this is one of the richest transit stations in the region. You know, I mean, it's comparable to Diridon in terms of ACE and Capital Corridor and, you know, the VTA buses and BART and Caltrain.
And the
all coming
airport.
together.
And
And the airport.
When
So
Rob
like,
was
how
nudging me
do
on
you-
that, and he was saying, why aren't you saying the airport? Because I'm not supposed to, but I mean, the airport,
yeah,
come on. What are we doing?
Yeah.
It's like right across the street.
So it's actually comparable to Millbrae.
Yeah.
Because they have very similar. They've got the airport right there with an airport connector. They've got Caltrain. There'll be a high-speed rail stop there, et cetera. So Santa Clara is one of those regional nodes. So how do we leverage that, you know, to the greatest extent possible?
You know, I also wanted to remind everybody that this is not like the diagram that you saw today is not the final diagram, right? This is the beginning of our discussion. And I think this is exactly the kind of discussion that we were hoping to have. And, you know, from here onwards, I think we want to test all these different options. What is the percentage of, or the balance of, you know, employment versus housing that we want to, or we can provide here? You know, I really appreciated, Jill, your point about, you know, the long commutes and, you know, how are we making sure that everybody, in, like, especially the underserved population has access to transit. And I also want us to think about, you know, transportation by itself is, I mean, it is a very, very important part of the equation, but transportation and land use are two sides of the same coin, right? And if we can support transportation and the goals for equitable access to transportation, because transportation choices offer equitable access to opportunities, then we do want to also think about how land use can support and advance those goals as well, right? We can create, or especially around transit stations, if you're able to provide, things like daily conveniences or, uses where people are not having to make extra trips, we are looking for trip minimization, right? And therefore, I think thinking about what that right mix of use in close vicinity of such a transit-rich area, station is, I think these are going to be really some critical decisions for us to make and think about in this process.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add a couple of things about the debate versus office space and residential. I actually know a couple of other commercial real estate guys, and they tell me that the office market, it's saying that their demand for offices is reduced. That's a pretty blanket statement. What has really happened is demand for like what do you call like class A office space, right? Which is like premium office spaces, the newest and the best. That still remains strong in many parts of the country, right? There's literally like new class A office space being built in the Bay Area. Like right now, look at like South San Francisco, Oyster Point, a lot of places there is demand for it. Even in Santa Clara, there's projects in the pipeline. The thing is like older office spaces, right? Like 1970s and 80s, like office parks, which are reaching the end of their lives, these older like suburban office buildings, demand for those has generally gone down. And you can see that even though like overall demand for office space has gone down, it does not mean that office construction is completely stopped. And obviously in the future, right, as the economy grows, demand for office space will continue to increase. And with regards to like travel demand, right, like without a doubt, office space is going to drive like exponentially more travel demand than residential. Just think about how many people are going to be working in like, I don't know, a standard 20-story office building versus how many people are going to live in there. Like the office building is going to generate like, who knows, 5-10 times as many trips simply because office space is much denser. And secondly, generally, if your office is located close to transit, you're much more likely to take the train than if you live close to transit, but your office is located far away. So with regards to how the zoning should be done, right? The whole quadrant which between Brokaw, De La Cruz, Coleman, and the railroad tracks, right? Which has those segregated zones for offices, residential, and mixed use. I feel that whole thing can just become general mixed use. Developers are just going to build like the most, depending on the location, right? Developers are simply going to build the building which generates the most revenue for them. If that's offices, well, they'll build offices. If that's residential, they'll build residential. Most likely, it's going to be a mix with the offices being located closer to the train station and residential being far away. That's pretty much how every city in the US has traditionally developed. And even today, if you look at mixed-use developments, it's usually offices near transit, residential slightly farther away. We obviously should leave the option open for flexibility. And one final point I wanted to bring up is the part north of this railroad tracks, right? Nobody currently lives there. It's taken up by, I think, a Costco, some industrial buildings. The fact that we have a large swath of land where nobody lives, it is a literal diamond mine because it is much, much easier to get something built in places where people don't live than in places where people do live. You're going to have like much less opposition. You're going to have a blank slate to basically rebuild infrastructure. You can plan where the parks are going to go, transportation infrastructure, all of that. So I really feel the part north of the station, I feel that should almost be like the central part of this whole station area. Since it's a blank slate, we can start from scratch. Nobody lives there. Make it a very, very high density mixed use development, like what happens in what we see in like Vancouver, Tokyo, so on and so forth. And most important thing is make sure it's flexible because markets change all the time. And it's going to be very, very difficult to exactly predict what type of residential, what type of commercial is currently in demand and what will be in demand in the future.
Great points. I think we want to leave it there unless Rob has one last burning comment.
Yeah, so Gateway Crossing is a great example, exactly what you're talking about. But the problem is all they ever wanted to build was apartments. So if all they build is apartments and we don't do a plan that's not asking for a certain percentage of retail corridor, you're not going to have energy. You're going to, I call it high density suburbia. And that's not what we want. We don't want high density suburbia. So you got to understand that the developers, you hit it, they just want to build housing right now.
Yeah.
That's the majority of what they
Right
want.
now, forever.
Well, yeah, because we're going to be always at a deficit. So just the beauty of this, and Dan and I and a few others just went through it with the downtown. The plan, especially if we get form-based code in, allows great flexibility, but, and I would say, encourage all of you to go look at the downtown plan, that there's just some simple diagrams which say these areas have to be retail to create a strong retail spine and an entity.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it'll be a great, it'll get you sped up in terms of understanding where we're headed.
Yeah, we called it fixed and flexible, right? So it's both. What items are important to us to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of activation, in terms of quality in place, but what items need to be left flexible to be able to respond to market. So it's both of those things.
Yeah.
All right. So,
One
okay,
small
one
point.
more comment,
Yeah.
because I want to respect everybody's time, and we're over by 15 minutes, but
Okay.
go
30
ahead. You
seconds,
got
30
one more comment.
Okay,
Let's
30
hear it.
seconds. Yeah, the industrial zone, somebody already mentioned it. It's all like 50s and 60s white boxes. No way you can do adaptive reuse with it. Like either it stays industrial or it has to be demolished and built into something else. Which is why I feel instead of calling it industrial arts, we should just call it like light industry in general. Potential uses are like multi-story light manufacturing, multi-story distribution hub, stuff like that. I mean, go to any Asian city, industry is quite dense. It's all like 4 or 5-story factories, warehouses, light manufacturing, distribution, all of that. It's near the airport, it's near a bunch of arterial roads. And in terms of the quote unquote adaptive reuse projects, right? Like I guess pickleball courts or maybe lofts, it's all going to have to be built from scratch anyway, since there's no potential for adaptive reuse. So I don't see any reason why those quote unquote quasi-adaptive reuse projects have to be located in the industrial art zone. They can just be distributed throughout the general mixed use zone. Like maybe we can designate certain parcels for certain types of entertainment or whatever. There's no reason we have to concentrate it in the industrial zone, which I feel would be much better used for high density industrial.
Okay. Okay, Sucrit.
So some of those like ideas would get addressed because we have a like market feasibility study, economic study coming out. So they'll like lend a lens to the market area and what can and cannot be possible. So we'll share that with you next time.
So this has been great. This is opportunities and constraints, but we're all definitely ready and raring to go into exploring in the next stage. So this is really good. This is exactly what we were hoping for. So thank you all.
So
I think we also wanted to open this up to the public. If anyone had any public comments or wanted to speak on this item or address the task force, if you're online, please raise your hand, or if you're here, you can come to the podium.
Good evening. Can you hear me? My name is Mary Grizzle. I have 3 things I'd like to say that excited me extremely. The first one is this young lady, her passion in speaking about the possibilities of what could be and what can be excited me to no end. I'm looking forward to hearing more of your ideas. I am very pleased. The second thing is I am very pleased that this group has decided on hiring WRT. I'm a very big fan of the group. Of course, they did our form-based code and our precise plan, and we're elated that they're going to be part of this. The third thing is I'd like to remind everybody that the grant that is coming up, or the end of you have to put the input in by September 20th. That grant will provide the city with numerable assets. One is they're going to tell the city how many cars they can remove from the area. That's one of the things that we're excited about. Another thing is that they're going to do part of the EIR. It's going to save the city thousands of dollars, if not more because they're going to do a partial EIR or an EIR. And thirdly, because they're going to provide the city with three of the most important things that can happen. And that is, they're going to provide the city. Give me a moment. I just fell and I'm busted my mouth and busted my face and I'm a little tongue-tied right now. But this is going to provide the city with what is possible to do with the station area plan and the downtown. It's going to provide them with the where to get the grant loans from. They can get the state and the federal. And our city needs guidance. Our group, Reclaiming Our Downtown, has been helping the city to do this. And one of the things that we all can do is push the city into getting this free grant. They've already let it lapse twice. We can't let it lapse again because next time there may not be a free grant like this, a planning grant. We need to make that happen, and we need to make it happen before the 20th. And so we're trying to get a meeting now. Dan and I are trying to get a meeting now with the people involved in doing the grant to make sure that that grant gets in on the 20th. And we'd like all of your support, of course. Thank you very much. And young lady, you are right on.
Is there anyone else? Donna, you are allowed to unmute and talk.
Hi, I want to thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you, WRT, and thank you, Task Force, for all of your comments. I've been through Millbrae. I've been through downtown Mountain View, riding the train from work down to Santa Clara. And I, would like to say, what if I get off the train at Santa Clara? How do I get home? And I lived over off of Lawrence Expressway in the south side of town on Benton Street. How do I get off the train, stop and get milk and a few groceries for the evening and go home? And I think that's what a lot of workers do now. And how do you, and then on the weekends, you can then go and have recreation. But downtown Mountain View, has that connection for their workers. Where do I go and how do I get that? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Is there anyone else? I'm seeing none. Oh, you can continue on to your next slide. Okay.
Thank you. So we'll see you guys soon. Thank you for the discussion today. We'll take some of these ideas and go back to our opportunities and constraints analysis. We'll start thinking about our next steps. We'll integrate what we hear from economic feasibility and market analysis into some of these ideas and come back to you in August. September is when we plan to have our first community workshop, taking all of these ideas and what we've learned till now to the community at large. And
Yeah, so we had talked about having the community workshop potentially be combined or after the September SATF, depending on if the task force members want to be involved or want to be facilitators. So we're just kind of floating the idea of what do you guys think? And Yeah, if you want to have it on the September task force meeting, September 19th is a scheduled date, or would you rather have it separate?
So
Any thoughts?
Sorry,
Yes, it's
you're
a,
asking to have the meeting and the workshop on the same day, is that what you're asking?
yes.
yeah, we were thinking if it would be nice to maybe use the task force time for the community workshop, and we could all be here, or we'll work on the venue locations, and then maybe have the community members come in. You all would also be there. You would be hearing feedback from them. If some of you would be interested, we could have you at some of the facilitation stations as well to have discussions with the community members and hear firsthand feedback. And then we come back together at our October task force meeting. We debrief on what we heard from the community, and then we go through a visioning session from everything that we've put together, so that then we can start our concept development work. And that's the work that's going to go on in the fall to the winter of this year. That's where we'll generate the different ideas of the densities that we would propose, and the number of units, office spaces, et cetera, that would different iterations for all of that we would want to bring back to you all.
Kind of workshop, because I know there's obviously different formats. you have.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I'm just worried, I don't know, at this early stage, we don't have a lot of people out here, but depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If it's just doing what we did tonight in a way, kind of explaining a few things and what would you want where?
Yes,
then-
so
then maybe, but then I always felt like the farmer's market, where you get so many people walking by, you might get more volume in that situation. So
So-
I think it's a matter of
yeah, so we have
where we
a
are.
few different like touch point options for the community in general, and we will do pop-ups as well through this process. But we do have a formal workshop also in the scope. And so we are envisioning it as an open house style workshop, where we will have stations for maybe like these 3 different categories that we talked about: mobility, public realm, and land use districts, for example.
Then my feeling, again, when I try to generate some energy first, right, versus getting so formal. I just feel like maybe at a farmer's market, have some things and then start generating and saying, hey, we're gonna have more formal workshop next. And I'm just.
Mhm.
want 5 people to show up.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Plus, on a Thursday, it's, you have working people,
For
so
weekends,
weekends are, if you want the public,
Saturday morning.
place you want to be.
Would, I wonder if, could we switch the Thursday task force, regular Thursday task force meeting to a weekend workshop session? So instead of doing the task force meeting on a Thursday for that September meeting, we would do a weekend workshop. And Rob, I think building up to it, maybe there's a couple of pop-ups ahead of time to generate interest. But then do the workshop at a time where it's, we're likely to get more participation. I think that's a good idea. But I think, this idea of having all of you as part of the facilitation, manning the booths with us, you're both hearing the feedback firsthand, but you're also, you guys own part of this plan. We're developing it together. So I think it's just, strengthening that.
SBHRS would be willing to host the workshop or one of the pop-ups, one of the workshops, whatever,
Cool.
at the depot.
It's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah,
Great
we'll
idea.
work with you on any of that.
Yeah, love that.
I think this was really useful feedback in terms of, gathering, just basically generating some energy. And the outreach is going to be really important if we want to make sure that there is, good participation. I think we have good information to work with. We'll internally, vet this a little bit more so that we can think about some possibilities for how to come, but really appreciate your willingness to and flexibility to modify this format.
Okay, thank you to our consultants, WRT. So we do have a third item on the agenda. Hopefully it won't take too long, but the third item is election of Station Area Task Force Chair and Vice Chair. So we'll just be doing this verbally. So if anyone has a nomination, please nominate.
You can nominate yourself, you can nominate someone else, and then we'll take a vote.
And can I nominate myself?
Nominate Patricia for chair.
I would as well.
I accept.
All third.
Yeah, give it to Patricia. Yeah.
We need a chair and a vice chair, so we've got two volunteers. Yeah, but anybody else, I guess. I hear two names, but anybody else?
Yeah, I think I'll go for vice chair instead of chair, actually.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll call it for a vote. Patricia Leung for chair. Please raise your hand if you would like to nominate Patricia as chair. Oh, sorry, roll call. Please. Oh, yes. Member Diaz.
Aye.
Member Collins.
Aye.
Member Evans.
Aye.
Member Ganesh.
Aye.
Member Hashimoto. I think he dropped. Okay. Member Huff.
Aye.
Member Leung.
Aye.
Member Mayor.
Aye.
Member Ondrasek.
Aye.
Member Plain.
Aye.
Member Stockwell.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Okay, so I will now be for secret for vice chair. Go down the list again. Member Diaz.
Aye.
Member Collins.
Aye.
Member Evans.
Aye.
Member Ganesh.
Aye.
Member Huff.
Aye.
Member Leung.
Aye.
Member Mayor.
Aye.
Member Ondrasek.
Aye.
Member Plain.
Aye.
And Member Stockwell.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Oh, are there any public comments for this item? Okay, seeing none. So now I can announce our chair is Patricia Leung and our vice chair is Sukrit Ganesh. Okay, so we'll now move on to public presentations. Is there anyone that would like to address the task force on items that are not on this agenda? Seeing no one. Okay. We'll move on to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting of July 25th, 2024?
So moved. Robin.
Third.
Okay, the motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we have to go and let it go.
I'm so sorry. Okay, I hate to be that person.
Member Diaz?
Aye.
Member Collins?
Aye.
Member Evans?
Aye.
Member Ganesh?
Aye.
Member Huff?
Aye.
Member Leung?
Aye.
Member Mayor? Member Ondrasek?
Aye.
Member Plain?
Aye.
And Member Stockwell?
Aye.
Okay, and the motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.